que yo maniwela, 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 que yo maniwela.
We're in a place right now called Gualala, California. Sometimes the names of places can give us an idea of the history of them. And in this case, the word Gualala is a Pomo word that means water coming down place. This was a place where the southern Pomo would gather during certain times of year at this river, and this river forms a boundary. So what we're looking at is really where the San Andreas Fault meets the Pacific Ocean in California. The Pomo were divided up into sort of three groups as they're recognized by anthropologists: the northern, central, and southern Pomo. And in reality, Pomo life was extremely complicated. They weren't a single state. They were roughly 25 different tribelets with their own dialects, customs, towns, and seasonal rounds. When the Russian-American company established their fur trade post at Fort Ross, the Kasaya Pomo moved down there to work with the Russians.
Que yo maniwela, que yo maniwela, que yo maniwela.
This place we call Fort Ross was originally a semi-permanent village of the southern Pomo called Mitini.
Que yo maniwela, que yo maniwela.
So the reason why the Spanish move all the way up here into San Francisco Bay, and then they established this mission here in 1776, and it was sort of the first one up here in the Bay Area, and then they established other ones in the South Bay in places like Santa Clara and San Jose, and then they moved north to the Marin Peninsula in 1817 and established San Rafael, because they were trying to compete with the Russians up at Fort Ross. They're working their way down the coast from the north, where they're up trapping for furs in Alaska, and then they start moving down and trapping sea otters off the coast of California. And they were deep all the way through Alta California and into Baja California. And the Spanish sort of didn't like that, because they were dipping into their labor pool by establishing a fort at Fort Ross. It was an agricultural center to grow fruits and vegetables for the Russian-American Fur Company up in Alaska. They needed someplace down here in a more temperate environment to grow food for their colonies to the north. And then that also served as a place where they could trade with northern Spanish missions for wheat and meat and things like that. But they were also competing for the same labor pool. So right now we're in the reconstructed blockhouse of the Fort Ross colony. As early as 1817 and 1818, Russian-American company records indicate that the sea otters had been completely trapped out of the areas immediately north and south of this outpost. By all accounts, sea otters were completely extirpated by the Russian-American company by 1820 in all of Alta California waters. Sea otters consume large quantity of sea urchins, abalone, and crabs where they're available. As the primary consumers of kelp vegetation, sea urchins have the capability, if left unchecked, to seriously denude the microalgae habitats. Thus, the balance between sea otters and these urchins is an important factor in shaping the density and distribution of kelp vegetation and associated fisheries in the North Pacific. Today, there are all these areas that are classified as sea urchin barrens. And what's happened is the sea otters aren't there to predate on the sea urchins, and so the sea urchin population explodes, and it eats up all the kelp and destroys the kelp forests. And abalone rely on the same thing for food, and so it affects the abalone fishery. And it has knock-on effects for the crab fishery and other things, and so that sort of
the problems with those fisheries is an artifact of landscape changes wrought by the Russian American Fur Company, doing things, up until they left Fort Ross in 1842. So they were there for 30 years and managed to sort of wreak havoc on a huge coastal ecosystem in a short period of time.
In 1850, a Baltimore schooner named Frolic wrecked off the Mendocino coast about half an hour's drive north of Gualala. When they saw all of the redwood trees around here, it kicked off a boom in the logging industry. So after the Russians abandoned Fort Ross around 1842, you have this influx of Euro-American settlers coming in the 1850s. The logging industry in Northern California has left some rather unsubtle changes in the environment that we can see right here. So from the 1850s on, you had very large amounts of logging going on upriver of the Gualala River, the mouth of which we see here. And we can see this large sandbar blocking the ocean or the river from entering the ocean. That sandbar is a result of all of the sediment that was washed down into this watershed during those intense clear-cutting operations of the late 19th century. And that bar kept the salmon from making it in. If the sea could not penetrate that bar, the local people here would literally go out with shovels and dig a hole in that bar in order to allow the salmon to run upstream. So in that sense, that sandbar and this valley as it looks today is an artifact of those 1850s logging activities. So after the Russians abandoned Fort Ross around 1842, you have this influx of Euro-American settlers coming in the 1850s. The Pomo were driven out of places like Gualala and onto reservations in the Fort Bragg area. With the abandonment of the Fort Bragg Reservation in 1867, 2,000 Pomo Indians sequestered there were either dispersed to various reservations throughout California or moved to the new Mendocino Reservation in Round Valley along a route called the Bloody Trail by the Pomos who passed down that story. When the Mendocino Reserve was discontinued in 1867, Pomo, who had been interned there, found themselves homeless and landless with no legal redress for their lands, which had been immediately occupied and deeded to white settlers.
So, that's sort of what landscape archaeology is in essence. It's like, how do people relate to the landscape? And colonial regimes are radically different from the way indigenous people maintained. People have had a serious effect on this ecosystem forever, as long as they've been here. It's just sort of the nature of that effect has changed. It's not managed in the same way.
Niche do